Hey folks, thanks for joining me again as we study the Bible together, and especially in this series of lessons, Christian attributes, things that a Christian needs to develop in their life if they're going to be pleasing to God and if we're going to influence the world around us. So we already talked about self-control, and now I'd like to share with you another Christian attribute that we must add to our lives if we're going to be pleasing to God. Again, this is Annie, and as I've told you, she's been with us for almost 8 months now, and we've learned a whole lot from her, and that's what this series of lessons is based upon. Today, our lesson from Annie is not so much something that she has taught us, but something that we have learned from taking care of her, and that is commitment. As Christians, if we fail to learn this concept, then we're really not ever going to be what we need to be, and we're never going to reach the destination that we want to reach. It takes commitment. I heard a story one time about a chicken and a pig, and they were talking in the barnyard. And they loved the farmer so much that they wished they could do something for him. And so the chicken suggested that they fix breakfast for him. And the pig said, well, okay, well, what would we fix? And the chicken suggested ham and eggs. Now, if you think for a second, if you're going to have a breakfast of ham and eggs, it really takes two things. It takes a contribution and it takes a commitment. The pig answered back to the chicken and said, for you, that's just a day's work. But for me, it's a life given. And although that's kind of odd story, I guess, it really brings things home. Sometimes you and I decide to contribute to God. Sometimes we decide to be involved, but we never really make a commitment. If you're looking here at this picture, if you notice, the ham, if this pig is going to donate some ham to this breakfast, he's going to have to die in order to do it. He's going to have to give his life for what he believes in, while the chicken only has to make a contribution. And as you look at these pictures, where do you fall? Spiritually speaking, where do we fall? Are we making a contribution to God? Or have we really made a commitment to Him? I want to share with you a couple of definitions of the word commitment. First of all, the state or quality of being dedicated to a cause or activity or etc. Now, that's a good definition, but that's kind of a definition of the chicken, isn't it? That's kind of the definition of being involved, being dedicated to a cause. But look at this definition. Commitment is an engagement or obligation that restricts freedom of action. Now that's interesting because that's really what commitment is. Commitment is a choice that costs us something. And let's look at the cost of commitment, maybe in a way that you might not have thought of before. You may have or may not have ever seen this phrase, opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is a concept in the field of economics. It also moves over into the everything that touches economics, such as accounting, specifically cost accounting. But the dictionary defines it as the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. And it expresses the relationship between a scarcity and choice. All of us only have a certain amount of resources. So opportunity cost is losing gain from other alternatives when you pick one over the others. In simple terms, the opportunity cost is the benefit not received as a result of not selecting the next best option. And we can make that even more simple. You can't have everything. And so you have to choose your path. And in choosing your path, it costs you something. If you choose an option when there are several options available, by choosing one, you have to give up all the others, or at least a portion of the others. And that which you give up, that cost, is called opportunity cost. You took the opportunity to make a choice, and that choice has a cost associated with it. And we think of that in economics. We can look at it in accounting. We can look at it in marriage. You know, when Carrie chose me to be her husband, it cost her every other man in the world. Now, that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but that's what commitment is. And marriage is a great opportunity for us to see the subject of commitment, because out of the billions of people in the world, this is the woman that I've chosen. This is the man that I've chosen. And in doing so, it costs me every other one. And I have to decide, is it worth it for this woman? Is it worth it for this man? Is it worth it for this job? Is it worth it for this choice or that choice? And that's a choice that we all have to make. Now, as we think of it in terms of Annie here, Carrie and I chose to take Annie into our home, or bring Annie into our home. And by doing so, we made a commitment to her. You see, when we got her, she looked like this, and she looked like that. You see, she was at about 8 pounds when we brought her home, and now she's closer to 58 pounds. So we've made a commitment here. We've chosen to take this puppy into our home, and she has really showed us the subject of commitment in a real way, because she needs us. And without us, she cannot survive. She cannot grow and be happy. She can't be what is meant for her to be without us. She relies on us, and we have given up many things for her. We've given up time. We've given up we've given up a lot of freedom. We've given up money, quite a bit of that too. But it is something that we've chosen to do. Those are opportunity costs. That's what it costs us to have Annie in our lives. And we have to decide whether the joy that she brings and the benefit that she brings to us is worth the cost. That's the choice that we have to make when we determine whether or not we want to answer the call that God sends to all of us. The call to be His children. Do I want to be a Christian? If I do, am I willing to pay the cost? Am I willing to make the commitment? So as we think about commitment, let's look at how God says that we should be committed and the depth to which we should be committed to Him. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 22, and let's read together there, beginning in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him and saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." That's the kind of commitment that God expects from his children. Notice verse 37, with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, with everything that you have. You see, Annie's here with me again this evening, and she spent all day today at the dog daycare. And she goes there, and you should see her run in. She goes in with everything that she has, and she plays hard all day. When she comes home, she's ready to lay down. She's given it all her strength and all her might all day long. And she's a good tired at the end of the day. And there's a lot that we can learn from that type of commitment to what we're doing. Ecclesiastes 9 in verse 10 says, "Whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with your might." And it goes on to say that there is no work or anything else in the grave to where you're going. There's a lot of people who seem to be saving themselves for some reason and holding back for some reason. What are you saving that energy and effort for? God says, whatever you find to do, commit to it, whatever it is. And especially living as a Christian. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 23, "Whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men." God wants us to commit ourselves to him. He wants us, like Annie, to give everything every day so that when we lay down at the end of the day, we can be pleased with the effort that we've given today. And when we lay down at the end of our lives, we can be eternally pleased with the commitment that we made in this life. So why do you think we don't commit? Why do you think we don't give our all sometimes? Why do you think we don't give all of our strength and all of our mind and all of our heart to those things which we do, and especially in offering our life to God? Why do you think that we hold back and we don't commit? I think it has to do with fear. At least in many, many cases, it has to do with fear. And you know what we're afraid of? We're afraid of failure. We're afraid that somebody is not going to be pleased with us, or we're not going to be pleased with ourselves. But then for others, I think there's a fear of success. As odd as that sounds, some people are afraid of succeeding. And that fear holds us back. It keeps us from giving all that we have to a project, to a job, or to a Christian life. Something that we need to think about in our own lives and examine in our own lives. A man by the name of Paul G. Stoltz wrote a book called The Adversity Quotient. And in that book, he described 3 types of people that exist in every organization. First, you find the climbers. These are people who never stop moving upward. They never stop trying to improve themselves. When they reach a dead end or they come to an impasse in some way, they find a way to reroute and overcome, because they're not going to let anything stand in their way. Their background won't stop them. Advantages or disadvantages, good fortune or misfortune, it doesn't matter. They just keep climbing. They don't rest on their laurels, and they don't cry over their failures. They just keep focusing on where they're going. The biggest group in every organization are the campers. And these are folks who have decided that they've reached a plateau and they like it there. They're sitting still. They're content with where they have gotten, and they dedicate all their energy to maintain the status quo. These are folks who never really reach their full potential. They're just satisfied with where they are right now. Mediocrity is a word that comes to mind when you think of campers sometimes, because over time, campers will experience atrophy and they will lose the ability to climb. Because they did not continue their climb, they lose the ability to climb. Even if the desire returns, sometimes the ability doesn't. And then the third group are quitters. These are the folks who are still in the organization, but they don't really care which way what happens now anyway. They've abandoned the climb. Or maybe they never really even climbed or started to climb to start with. As you look at these three, which one are you? The biggest group are the campers. We talked about a minute ago, sometimes we don't go and reach our full potential, or we don't give all we have because we're afraid of either failing or succeeding. If we succeed, more will be expected of us. And if we fail, maybe people will think less of us. Are you afraid to fail? Even knowing that failure is always a part of life? Are you afraid to succeed? Are you afraid if you do something well, you'll be expected to do more? Well, let me give you a hint. You will. To whom much is given, much is required, but the ones who do more receive more. Where do you fit? One hint. We'll talk about it further as we go along. In the church, there's only two out of these three. You see, in the church, you're either a climber or you're a quitter. God doesn't allow camping. He associates it with quitting. You see, you and I sometimes in the church and in our spiritual lives will allow ourselves to camp, and we think we're doing just fine, but God doesn't allow that. God doesn't allow mediocrity. God doesn't allow us to do less than what we can. God doesn't allow anything less than commitment. And I think it's a good picture to look here at this and see, where do I stand? We know what we should be doing, but what are we really doing? And it's a good test for us to look at ourselves and see where we stand with God. The next passage I'd like for us to consider as we think about commitment and what God expects of us is in Matthew chapter 16. And we begin reading there in verse 24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Assuredly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." As we look at what God expects of us as far as our commitment goes and our level of commitment, we find three steps in verse 20. First, we must decide what we're going to do. He says, if anyone desires to come after me. If you choose to come after me, you got to make that decision. And God has given us the opportunity to make that decision on our own. He doesn't force us to follow him. He makes it where we want to follow him or where it's desirous for us to follow him. But we have to make the decision as to what to do. The second step is we have to commit. As we read, he says, let him deny himself and take up his cross. We have to commit ourselves to God. If we decide we're going to follow him, we've got to be all in. Our lives, our burdens, our finances, our time, our energy, our efforts, we have to commit. That's the cross we bear in this life. That's our life. That's the burden that we bear. We have to commit that to him. We have to turn our attention and our efforts to him and to following what he would have us to do. And then the third step is to follow. Follow me. Specifically, we have to decide and commit ourselves to following Jesus, no one else. We have to make sure that we are choosing the right path to follow. And then when we find that path, we have to follow. We have to let our actions follow what we've decided to do. And that commitment must be total. In Revelation chapter 3, Jesus, speaking to the church at Laodicea, tells how he feels about lukewarmness. It sickens him. Jesus even says, I would rather you be cold than lukewarm. And Jesus doesn't want anybody to be cold. Jesus wants us all to be on fire for him. Jesus wants us all to be those climbers. He wants us to not let anything get in the way. But he said, I would rather you make a bad decision as no decision at all. I would rather you just decide to walk away than not to commit fully when you decide to follow me. Those are some very pointed words. Those are some words that we should and we must listen to, that we must apply to ourselves. Is our commitment to the Lord total? One of my favorite stories about dealing with commitment that I've ever heard has to do with a Spanish conquistador by the name of Hernan or Hernando Cortez. In 1519, he and about 600 men, about 11 ships, landed in Mexico. And they were there to claim that land for Spain. The first thing he did, reportedly, when they got off the ships and onto the land, is Cortez gave the order to burn the ships. He said, if we return to Spain, we will return in their ships. That's commitment, isn't it? What happened? Well, Spain defeated and plundered the Aztecs and took over and claimed Mexico for Spain. Notice this, by taking away the possibility of retreat, he really only gave his men one choice: succeed or die. Now, that's pretty drastic, isn't it? Succeed or die. When you take away the possibility of retreat, then you really take away your choices, don't you? That's commitment. That's definitely limiting your freedom. And in this case, they succeeded. You know, the choice that Cortez gave to his men when they landed in Mexico, is the same choice that God gives to every human being. God created us in His image, and then He gave us His Son to die for our sins. Then He gave us His Word to follow. And the charge that we have as human beings is the same as what was given to Cortez's men: succeed or die. You see, God has taken away the retreat. There's no chance for us to retreat, because this life is a proving ground for that life which is to come, and there are only two destinations for our soul. And because of that, it means that we have to give everything. Everything. What would a man give in exchange for his soul? Nothing. Nothing is more important than our soul. Listen here at Luke chapter 14. Listen at the commitment level that Jesus expects of us as we begin reading there in verse 25. And great multitudes went with him, and he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. And whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going to make war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? Or else while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple, unless you forsake all that you have. That's the level of commitment that God expects of us. Now, it's God who says to honor our fathers and mothers. It's God who tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves, that we are to take care of our families. Back in verse 26, he's not telling us to abandon our family or to not provide and not to love our families. But what he's really saying is, and it's a hard saying, that your commitment must be total. And even if your family keeps you from following me, then you must choose me. That's the level of commitment that is expected of us. And he will not expect, or he will not accept anything less. Succeed or die. Boy, those are hard words, because we live in a society today where we give participation awards if people just show up. God doesn't allow us to show up. God says, you got to give me everything. Now, if you'll give me everything, then I'll give it back to you. If you will commit your life to me, then I will give your life back to you and let you enjoy the life that you have. But I have to be first, even before family. Have we committed our lives and burned the ships? Have we given everything to the Lord? Is he first in our hearts? You see, retreat is easy if you have the option. It's easy to turn and run. But the question is this: if you turn and run from God, if you fail to totally commit to the Lord, to whom shall we go? Over in John chapter 6, verse 66, says that the multitudes turned and left Jesus. See, he was feeding them, and then when he stopped feeding them physically and he began to teach them what it was going to take if they intended to follow him, many of them turned and left. Jesus turned to his own disciples in verse 67 and he said, will you also go away? And this is Peter speaking in John 6 and verse 68. Lord, to whom shall we go? That's the question of commitment. Lord, we've given up everything to follow you. We believe that you are the Son of God, and we believe that following you is going to take us where we want to be. If we leave you, Lord, to whom shall we go? Folks, that's a question we have to ask ourselves. If we fail to commit everything to the Lord, what are we committing to? What are we turning to? To whom shall we go? We know the answer to that. There is nowhere to go. God gives us the opportunity to live eternally with him. The only other option is one that we do not want. To whom shall we go? Succeed or die? If we commit to the Lord according to his terms, we will succeed. We can all succeed. So we've seen that commitment has to be total, and that goes back to our definition of commitment, an engagement or obligation that restricts freedom of action. When we make a choice, it restricts any other choice, or in some cases, takes away that choice. The Bible shows us wonderful examples of commitment. When people reached a place where they had to make a choice, but realized the choice had really already been made. Look at this list. Abraham was asked to leave his home and journey to a place where he didn't even know and hadn't heard of. And he got up and he left in the book of Genesis. And then after being given a son, a promised son from God, he obeyed God when God told him to offer Isaac, his only son, as a sacrifice. That's commitment. Moses gave up living in Pharaoh's house to do the right thing when he saw his people needed him. Commitment, cost, opportunity cost. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in Daniel chapter 3, instead of worshiping the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, they faced a fiery furnace. And they told him in Daniel chapter 3, King, we've already made our choice. We made our choice before you made the law to bow down to this image. And so because we've made our choice, because we've committed ourselves to God, we will choose the fire. And we know that God can save us from that fire. And if he doesn't, we'll die. Daniel made the same choice in Daniel chapter 6. Before he would bow down and pray only to the king, he chose the lions. You see, Daniel had already made his choice. He'd already committed himself to God. So the day that he found out that he could only pray according to the law, could only pray to the king, he just quietly went home and prayed to God, just like he always had, because he was committed. And that commitment placed him in a den of lions. Peter, Andrew, James, John, these were fishermen. They gave up their jobs to follow Jesus. Jesus said, come follow me. And they did. The commitment to Jesus cost them their jobs. How many people would give up a job for God? That's commitment, isn't it? That's a cost. But unfortunately, so many people would rather keep a job that endangers their soul than to give up that job and secure their soul. The first century church in the book of Acts, when things were needed, they sold their homes, they sold their land, and they shared the profits of that, the proceeds of it. And they were persecuted every way you could be persecuted, but they faced the cost because they were committed to the choice they had made to follow God. Stephen was stoned for preaching the truth. Paul was persecuted for the same thing. Think about Jesus and the commitment that he made to us. Jesus said, I could pray to my Father, he would send me 12 legions of angels. You know, we sing a song called, he could have called 10,000 angels. 10,000 just a drop in the bucket is the number of angels he could have called. But he didn't. You see, commitment in this list of people, commitment restricted their freedom of action because they had already chosen their path. And that's commitment. And when we see commitment on the level that we see it in these people, then we have a very good idea of what God expects of us. He expects no less of us than what he expected of these folks. If we have to give up our job, if we have to give up our home, if we have to give up our freedom, if we have to give up our very lives, that's what he expects of us. And that seems drastic until you realize what he offers in return. God will not accept anything less than our total commitment. He has to be first. He doesn't take away our whole lives. He allows us to live, but he expects us, first of all, to commit to him. As we think about commitment, you know, we started this by explaining how that Carrie and I have made a commitment to Annie because she needs us. And so we have examined the costs and we have decided that we will be committed to her and make her a part of our lives. But you know, there's a difference. Commitment's not something so much that we learned from Annie, but that we learned in bringing her into our home. You see, Annie needs me. God doesn't need me. I need God. But the commitment that I make to her because of her need for me is the same level of commitment that I need to make to God because of the level in which I need him. Without me and without Carrie, Annie will die. She cannot take care of herself to the level that she needs to, and she will die. The same thing happens to me. If I don't commit my life to the Lord, I too will die. It's worth the cost to have Annie in our home. It's worth the cost to follow God, whatever that cost may be. We can't be pleasing to God unless we develop Christian attribute of commitment, total commitment, giving everything that we have to God. Look at Annie. I told you before, she's worn out from playing all day. She's had a wonderful day. She gave everything, and now she's laying behind me, completely peaceful, snoring away. You know, that's a picture of what you and I can have if we will commit our lives and our hearts to our Lord. He's given everything to us, and he offers us even more. He offers us comfort and peace. He offers us a confidence in our salvation that will allow us, no matter what we've gone through during the day, to lay down at night and be completely at peace. Have you committed yourself to the Lord? Please examine your heart. Take the time to go back and look at the passages that we've shared in this particular lesson and apply them to your life. If there are changes you need to make those changes while you have the time, while you have the opportunity. I appreciate you sharing this time with me, and God bless y'all.